So many of the big D&D YouTubers have talked about all these issues with Counterspell, but I'm here to shake things up. Why do people hate or not hate Counterspell? Well, it doesn't matter if you hate it a little or a lot. I'm gonna show you how you can customize it to exactly fit your table. And I'll show you what my rule change is to shake up this entire system and make Counterspell more epic than ever. Because what if you could counter a fireball with a cone of cold? Now let's roll it. Welcome to the Dungeon Coach. I'm the Dungeon Coach. I'm gonna help lower that DC in your game by showing you how to actually homebrew and fix things to truly customize your Dungeons and Dragons game. Because if I fix Counterspell, and trust me I have, it's freaking awesome. That means I've fixed it for my game, not yours. If you like my fix, that's great, but I'm doing a homebrew buffet that you can literally pick and choose what you like from. There's gonna be multiple parts to this video, so to keep things quick and efficient, I'm gonna have the timestamps right here and linked in the top comment so you can go where you want. We're gonna go over what the issues are with the current Counterspell because I feel like it's super important to know why something's off before you know how you wanna fix it. We'll also give Counterspell a little bit of credit for what's actually good about it before we fix it. But I think it's like one thing. Then I'm gonna give you that buffet table of creative options that you can combine together to make your own perfect Counterspell that best fits you and your players. Because this is a little bit of a different approach than what's normally on YouTube, so if you'd like me to just shut up and tell you how I fixed it, I can do that too. But I don't want to just fix things for you, and I want to give you the tools so that you can homebrew yourself. But don't worry, because after that I will show you my own personal version of Counterspell and how I fix it. That thing is pretty sweet. So if you want to skip the rant and homebrew buffet, go right there. And finally, I'm going to shake up the entire foundation of Magic at its core and take Counterspell to the epic spell countering level that it should be. Spells colliding midair and casters overpowering one another. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. So what is the big issue with Counterspell? Whether you like it or hate it, let's really put our finger on why it feels bad so we can fix the right thing. The first thing is yes, it feels epic as a player when you Counterspell the big baddie on their turn, stopping that big spell. But on the other side of the screen, the DM just lost his big turn for his big bad, and that feels bad. But I'm not trying to throw a pity party here for the DM because it's nowhere near as bad as the opposite. As a player, you only get one turn, and the DM controls multiple things, so counterspelling one of them doesn't really ruin a round for them. But as a player, if you get counterspelled, that's pretty much your entire turn wiped away. You don't get to play this round. And trust me, that feels bad for both that player and the DM. So I myself just end up not using it against my players so they can play the game. Another DC YouTuber, Davy Chappie, DC, Davy Chappie. He has a great rant that he went on, and we actually think pretty similar on this.
It's stupid. There should never be a spell that when cast basically ruins a player's entire turn, no barrier required. It's the no fun allowed button that you don't want to admit is busted when your party is using it, and then feel completely screwed over on when it ends up happening to you.
So his full video will be linked down in the description. Now don't get me wrong, I love when my players make epic plays to thwart my bosses. And I love crushing my players with huge abilities. But I want both of those things to happen without stopping one side from actually being able to have their turn. There's just a better way to handle it that's far more epic, but we'll get into that in a second. I tried to put my finger on exactly why this feels unfair, and I think it's because as a counterspeller, you spend your reaction, something that's very rarely used by casters, to stop the target's entire action, leaving them to move around and use the bonus action. So from an action economy perspective, it's just not fair. But don't worry, I have a solution for that too. Another thing here is I've never liked the fact that you can upcast Counterspell. I feel like this brings in a metagaming component and adds to that feeling of frustration and helplessness when you get counterspelled. Here's what I mean. I feel like higher level spells should just straight up be harder to counter. But setting that aside, here's what I mean about metagaming. A player casts Counterspell on a bad guy's fireball. Ooh, but you didn't know this. The DM actually upcast that fireball to 6th level. That feels bad. Or switch it around and then the player upcasts fireball and the DM counterspells it. You're gonna look like a huge jerk as a DM if you say that your bad guy just happened to actually upcast his spell to be the exact same spell level as the player who just said the spell level they were casting. This whole thing just feels slimy because the DM always knows what level the player is casting it at, and even if both sides are being honest, this still just feels bad. I have never liked this because I feel like it's far more epic narratively for one caster to overpower the other in a battle of spellcasters. But when you upcast and it just auto cancels, then there's literally no moment of conflict at the table, no tension, and it just ends. All of these different things just feel like gotcha moments that never feel good. If you make both sides roll for it, at least each side always feels like they had a chance that it could happen. Here's another thing that bothers me with the rules as written. Who is counterspelling who doesn't actually matter, and I mean this in two ways. A level 5 player who just learned Counterspell has the exact same counterspelling ability as a level 20 counterspeller, assuming they both cast it at 3rd level. So that level 5 character trying to counterspell your big in-game boss would have the exact same chance as the level 20 player. I feel like who is casting the spells should come into effect. It should be harder to counterspell the fireball of a higher level spellcaster than one who just learned it. But maybe that's just me, and if you don't agree with a lot of the things I'm saying here, when we do the Homebrew Buffet, then don't choose those options and only choose the ones that feel right to you. Time out. I don't know if y'all know this, but rules as written, you do not add your proficiency bonus to the check you make when your counterspell is a lower level than the spell you're targeting. It's just an ability check plus the spellcasting modifier of the counterspeller versus a DC 10 plus the spell level of the targeted spell. So if you have been adding in that proficiency bonus, you've been cheating this whole time and making it a lot easier to counter spells. But that entire rant I just went on goes against this because I do feel like you should add your proficiency bonus to this thing, but we'll get into that later. And now for the thing that upsets me the most about this whole thing is counterspelling counterspells. Do you know how dumb this is? Mechanically and literally, this is just awful. Being able to counterspell counterspells just burns through spell slots of everyone involved and brings into the mix which side has more counterspellers. Because whichever side has more counterspellers to counterspell the counterspeller who's counterspelling their allies' spells, whoa. And again, from a DM perspective, I would be a jerk if I had one more counterspeller than my players, even if that's what I feel like would happen. For my final point here, I've never heard anybody actually talk about this, but maybe this is the athletic coach in me. Just think about this. Reaction time is the time it takes for you to respond to a stimulus. You see someone casting a spell and react to it. So stay with me on this chain of logic. Counterspell, a reaction spell, would have to be faster than any of the action spells that it's countering. Since by the time you see someone casting a spell, they've already started casting their spell, you have to react to it and cast your spell and get it off before they finish casting their spell. It also just makes sense to me that reaction spells and even bonus action spells are faster to cast. So if Counterspell is that fast to cast, then you would need something faster than Counterspell to counterspell a counterspell. Here's an example. A wizard wants to counterspell a sorcerer's fireball. The sorcerer starts casting the fireball, which takes a full action to cast. The wizard quickly notices this and reacts, casting counterspell. So how on earth would a sorcerer even be able to cast counterspell at the counterspell that's trying to stop the spell he's currently actually casting? You would have to stop casting the spell you're currently casting to be able to get off the counterspell to stop their counterspell. But then you just stop casting your own spell to stop them from stopping your spell. Man, this is dumb. The last thing I'll say on this is, for me, even another caster watching this happen shouldn't be able to counterspell a counterspell. Let's just hypothetically say it takes someone 0.7 seconds to cast a counterspell. Now, I just made that up, but let's just say that's how fast it is. You would have to see someone casting that spell, then react to that spell after it's already started to cast your spell with the same cast time of 0.7 seconds. And if you started your spell after they started their spell, theirs would go off before yours. Do you see what I'm saying here? I feel crazy. So maybe Counterspell can only counter spells that are in action. But before y'all go crazy on me, we'll get into that once I fix this stuff here in a second. So at my table, I want countering spells to feel epic. Imagine Harry Potter wizard duels or Dragon Ball Z energy blasts. But with the rules as written, this is definitely not how it feels. There's no battle between casters and no consideration for who's casting it, and there's always one side that feels bad. But don't worry, we'll fix it in a second. But first, let's talk about what's good about Counterspell. It has a 60-foot range, and I think that's good, and that's it. Having a 60-foot range does make it tactical, but even this I've thought about taking out myself. And I actually did take this out for the very last system change that I did, but we'll talk about that at the very end. Time out! What I'm about to do here is something I feel like isn't done enough on YouTube. I'm gonna give you options, and I mean a lot of options, to be able to fix this thing exactly how you want it. Because at the end of the day, I wanna fix these things for you guys and make it feel good for you, not just have you take whatever I have. That's the exact message I'm trying to spread here, is that homebrew is fluid for anybody, and you should take and change it how you want for your table. In fact, I was just going through the comments on all my videos today, and I found a great comment from Phil on my homebrew rest system, linked down in the description. He said, maybe this is too much, but I broke down your rest system into 4 categories, with a quick breather, a short rest, a long rest, and a full rest. And I absolutely love it. That's exactly what I want you guys to do with not only my homebrews, but anything that you find. Thinking outside that box. So after this next section, you will have your very own shiny counterspell for you to use at your table, and after that, I'll show you what I've came up with. And after that, I'm going to show you an entire system that changes up Counterspell forever. So now, let's get into those Homebrew Buffet options. In an overview, Counterspell's problems that we've talked about is it takes people's turns away from them, and that feels bad. It auto-counters spells, which also feels bad. It doesn't give the feeling of a battle between two casters. Who is casting it doesn't actually matter, and counterspelling counterspells is just dumb. Man, that upsets me. So to make sure things are clear, I'll be referring to the two magic users as the caster and the counterspeller. The first huge decision you're gonna have to make is how many people are rolling for this thing. Is just the counterspeller gonna roll against some sort of DC, or are both rolling? If you want only the counterspeller to roll, you could make this an ability check with their spell casting modifier versus the target's spell save DC instead. This does not feel like that battle between two casters, but this is just another option. You can also mess around with what's added to this roll, but we'll talk about that here in a second. So for me, the only option here is to have both the counterspeller and the caster make a roll of some kind to see who can overpower the other, because that's the feel I'm going for. So here's some extra things you can add on to these rolls, because both of these casters are going to be rolling a d20 and adding their spell casting ability modifier to it. But I personally also like to add their proficiency bonus, like I said before. If you're truly trying to see who can overpower the other, I feel like proficiency bonus, which also represents power and level, should be taken into consideration. And to spice things up even more, you can give out additional ability modifiers to whoever is casting the higher spell, and they gain a +1 on top of their roll for every spell level that they're casting higher than their targets. So if a third level counterspeller is trying to counter a 6th level spell, then the person who's casting the 6th level spell would get a +3 added onto their roll. But for me personally, I feel like the level of spell you're casting should mean more than just a measly +1. So for every spell level that's higher, I would add +2 to that roll. So in that same situation with the level 3 counterspeller, counterspelling a level 6 spell, instead of a +3, I actually make it a +6. Or if you want to structure it differently, instead of always giving the modifier to who's casting the higher level spell, you could always give that modifier to the counterspeller. They'd add to their roll if their spell was higher than the target's and subtract if it's lower. So with that same analogy, the level 3 counterspeller trying to stop a 6th level spell, if you go with a 1 point per spell level, the counterspeller would get a -3 onto his roll, or if you go with a +2, he'd get a -6. Either way, it's the same thing, but again, I'm just trying to get the right feel at your table. Now there's a third and super cool way how I accomplish this for my table, but that's gonna come up here in a second. And before I forget, I don't personally do this, but you could also add in a simple +2 bonus to the counterspeller if they know how to cast the spell they're trying to counter. And I can totally see this, because if you know that spell that you're trying to counter, I feel like you might have a better job at doing it. Next category is the counterspell's level, and if it auto succeeds or not. A super simple fix here to change the rules as written as little as possible is something my DC friend Davy Chappie also thought of. You just remove the line in the rule that says if it's a higher spell level, it auto succeeds, and just force that roll to always happen. Or in my case, force that ability check on both casters. The next thing you have to decide for your custom counterspell is if you can upcast it or not. I personally say no, because I feel like the higher the level the spell is, it should be harder to counter that spell. And this would also eliminate those cringy cat and mouse upcasting games that I talked about earlier. And what about countering counterspells? Can you do it or not? Now go with me here. What if you do this? I feel like bonus actions like Misty Step just happen very quickly. And I feel like reactions like Hellish Rebuke, as soon as you get hit, fire back at the attacker. So I feel like it'd be way too hard to counterspell those things and have a fast enough reaction time to even see that thing coming. So what if you could only counterspell things that were full actions to cast? I feel like this just makes sense and feels right, because I feel like if somebody's watching somebody running and they cast Misty Step, that would be too quick to try and counter, which leads me to my final idea to make it feel even better. The last thing we've not addressed here is that bad feeling about your entire turn being wasted with someone else's reaction. Here's my solution. In the same line of what I just said with the action versus reaction thing, you use your action to cast a spell, and if it gets countered, what if in that small moment of whatever time you have left, you're able to cast a cantrip instead? You were gonna cast a huge spell with your turn, but it got countered, and all you have time to do is get out a quick cantrip. I know, cantrips do also cost an action to cast, and this kind of contradicts it, but I feel like people would be able to cast cantrips quicker than actual spells. They're just so easy. So for example, the sorcerer's casting a big fireball, and it gets counterspelled by that wizard. Instead of his turn being basically over and getting skipped, he can actually shoot out a quick firebolt at the dang wizard to get some revenge. This just takes a little bit of that edge off, because at the end of the day, a cantrip's not going to change the tide of battle. And this stops you from losing your turn outright. So now you have all the tools and you can take all these different settings and customize them to fit your game. Time out. I want to say a special thanks to one of my Platinum Dragon patrons, Purius. He not only supports this channel in a huge way, but he is a next level homebrewer. He's gone back and forth brainstorming with me on this, and he has a lot more cool stuff that I'm going to put in another link down in the description. So here is my counterspell. All the first things about the spell are the same, but here's the first line. You attempt to interrupt a creature in the process of casting a spell, and the target spell must have the casting time of 1 action. Because man, those bonus actions or reactions are just too quick. You make a spell casting ability check contested by the target's spell casting ability check. You both gain a +1 bonus to your check for every level that you are casting your spell at above your target spell level, or a -1 penalty to your check for every level you are casting your spell below your opponent's spell. If you remember from the buffet options I gave you earlier, I feel like every spell level that you're higher than your opponent's should be a +2 modifier. But how I did it here is I separated that modifier to both parties so it's always the same, and that just feels right. So in that same analogy from earlier, a level 3 counterspeller trying to counter a level 6 spell, the level 3 counterspeller, since he's 3 spell levels lower, would -3 from his roll, and the level 6 spellcaster is 3 levels above, so he would add 3 to his roll, which is effectively the same as a 6-point difference. No matter what the result is, both parties burn that spell slot, and of course, if the caster wins, his spell goes off as normal, and if the counterspeller wins, the spell stops. But what if their rolls in this contest are a tie? Now, I'm a sucker for Wild Magic Surge, so much so that I have a D300 custom Wild Magic Surge table that I give to some of my patrons, but here's what I do for this. On a tie, both spells fail and take no effect, and both targets must roll in the Wild Magic Surge table. Now again, if you're not a fan of this Wild Magic Surge, you can just take this part out, but I love it. The last 2 things here is if the target caster's spell fails, they can immediately cast a cantrip as part of that same action, because cantrips are just quicker. And finally, I just wanted to say this, but this spell cannot be cast at a higher level. So if I were to try and fix just the spell itself, that's what I would do. But let's start to spice things up here. Time out! I was originally not going to put this in this video and I was going to have it be its own separate video, but I really wanted to share this with you guys and I have a lot of new videos coming out and I didn't want to take another time to make a whole video about just this. Because I will openly admit that this is out there, but I think it's extremely awesome. So if you absolutely hate it, then please don't flame me down in the comments, just leave it. But if you think you might like this and you want to have some healthy debates, then I'm all for that. Because I have a lot more ideas that are outside of the box like this one, and I want to see what you guys will think with a little bit more of an extreme case. So here we go. What if you remove Counterspell and make the ability to counter spells a fundamental core principle of magic itself? What if you could use any spell to creatively counter other spells? What if a fireball could be countered by Cone of Cold? What if a caster that knows the spell suggestion could go toe-to-toe against someone trying to cast Dominate Person on somebody? What if similar schools of magic, if matched up correctly, could actually counter each other? Energies and spells colliding midair. Now that sounds epic. So here's the new system I created just for this video that I'm throwing out there with 0 playtesting, but I think would be so cool and I can't wait to try it myself. Now before I get into this, I want to give a shout out to the person who inspired me to go down this rabbit hole. D&D YouTuber Jordan, the PH is silent, his channel will be linked down in the description, but he has a great video where he goes over all the problems and issues with counterspells and how to fix it. He talked about Dungeon Crawl Classic Spell Duels and inspired me to come up with this system. The biggest thing he said in this video about Spell Duels is the system from Dungeon Crawl Classics is very complicated. So I tried to put my spin on it and make it as simple as possible for 5th edition. Here we go. When another creature that you can see begins to cast a spell, you can use your own reaction to attempt to counter this spell with any spell of your own. The target spell and the spell that you cast must be within the same school of magic. Evocation versus evocation, enchantment versus enchantment. It also must be a 1st level spell or higher, so no cantrips. And like the rule we just said, it has to have a casting time of 1 action. And if the spell you're countering has an area to it, like a line or a cone, then your spell has to overlap that spell. For example, if another creature is casting the Cone of Cone spell, you can use your reaction for another evocation spell, such as another Cone of Cone spell. How cool is that? 2 Cone of Colds blasting against each other. Or you could go another elemental route with a fireball, lightning bolt, ice storm, to attempt to counter the target spell, provided both spells overlap each other. For my example earlier about Dominate Person and Suggestion, both of those are enchantment spells and you'd be able to counter one with the other. And I would love it if you guys comment down below with cool counterspell ideas, and you could even comment back and forth with each other of different spells you'd stop each other with. So once you've triggered this spell duel, you both make a spell casting ability check contested by your target's spell casting ability check. This is the same thing as before, and you both add or subtract 1 depending on what level spell you're casting compared to your opponent's. Now I know what some of y'all are thinking is, how could you stop a Cone of Cold on your reaction with a Cone of Cold if Cone of Cold is also an action? Just stop it and go with me on this, because their Cone of Cold can go off, then your Cone of Cold goes off, hits midair, clashes with each other. Because in a lot of ways, this is not actually countering a spell, it's overpowering each other. So I'm totally fine with that. So of course, if the counterspeller fails his check against the caster, their spell goes off as normal. But if the counterspeller wins, then his spell fails. And no, the counterspeller doesn't get a free cast of that spell. The energy from that spell is used to stop the other spell. And the same thing if they tie, they roll in that magic wild surge table. And like I said earlier, if the target spell does get countered, they can still use their action to cast the cantrip. Oh, I want to play this so bad. But for real, I really want to know what you guys think about something like this, because I know it's really outside the box. I just want to say a big thank you to everybody that's supporting me here on this channel. And I'm not just talking about my Patreon supporters or YouTube members, but my subscribers too. We've gotten about 600 subscribers in the last week or so, which is crazy. And I wanted to thank you all for that in a big way with this double giveaway that I'm doing. Don't forget to join in because it ends at the end of the month. It's a crazy $500 giveaway for both my patrons and YouTube members and for my subscribers. We had that crazy 5K live stream recently, and you guys donated over $150 for the Dungeon Coach Laptop Fund. And in the process, you guys broke the stream, and really, I guess it was my internet and crappy phone that I stream on. But that's exactly what I'm doing with the support here from you guys, is putting it back in to give you guys better stuff. There are some absolutely huge things in the works on this channel that I don't want to tell you guys yet because I want it to be a surprise. So click right here for my most recent homebrew house rules, and right here for some more homebrew stuff. And click right here if you're interested on Patreon, or hit the join button down below if you want to help support this channel. So as always, stay creative and think outside that box. Peace.